We are here for the Miami Valley Women's Center. We are going to raise money for babies and their mothers who face crisis situations. And the ministry that is done here tonight takes women who have nowhere to go, who would otherwise be left alone, and gives them a place to go so that they can choose life and find that their whole life doesn't fall apart. I can't think of a better way for people to give their money. I am here to make a case for the pro-life view and to help listeners understand that they don't have to be a PhD candidate, they don't have to be a graduate school candidate, they just need to be clear on a few key questions. And if they're clear on those questions, they can make a good case for life wherever they are. First, we want to raise enough money so the center can open a 4th location. That's phenomenal. Secondly, we want to continue to fund the growth of the existing ministry, make sure the medical clinic functions and flourishes, reach more women who are abortion-minded, reach schools with pro-life truths, and work toward impacting this community with a ministry that really cares about the women and children. The majority of women who choose abortion do so because they feel abandoned either by the men who they are in relationship with, or their families, or their communities. A ministry like this one says to that woman, you are not alone. You don't have to go this with no help, no support. We're here for you. And when that is in place, the chances that she will keep her baby and not kill her baby through abortion go up dramatically.
Someone who is passionate for the cause of life is our guest speaker, Scott Klusendorf. Mr. Klusendorf is the founder and president of Life Training Institute, established in 2004 to challenge and equip pro-life advocates to persuasively defend their views in the public square. He is a graduate of UCLA with honors and holds a master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University. At the collegiate level, Scott has debated opponents such as Nadine Strozen, president of the ACLU, and Kathy Neer, president of Planned Parenthood of California. He is an author and has been speaking full-time since 1991. And I have to say, in the short time that I've been able to get to know Scott, it is a pleasure to know him. So ladies and gentlemen, will you please give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Scott Klusendorf.
Thank you, Tiffany. I want us all to do something. I'd like us to stand and thank Tiffany for her service. This is a tough job she's got, and I'd like us to acknowledge her work. Well, I'm introduced as an apologist. I should tell you what that is. An apologist is not someone who runs around and says he's sorry all the time. That's what husbands do. Ladies are going, preach it, bro. We'll deal with your pride later. An apologist is someone who makes a case for what he or she believes. And men and women, the way we leave a legacy for life is to all of us understand we are all apologists now. The days of believing the defense of the pro-life view can be left to a few professionals who do the heavy lifting are over. The culture has changed. And to illustrate the responsibility awaiting each of us, I'd like to take you to the streets of London, England, 4 years ago. I get to go over there usually twice a year to help British pro-lifers get their movement going. And I want you to know tonight, there is a pro-life movement in Great Britain that is humming along quite nicely. And one of the, yeah, you can applaud that. And in 2012, I was there with my youngest son, Michael, and while we were there, we had a day off. I wasn't speaking, so we went to the Imperial War Museum. I don't know if you're a history buff, but if you are, on your bucket list needs to be the Imperial War Museum. They have a Spitfire hanging from the ceiling. The plane that saved the West in 1940, and the reason we're not speaking German at tonight's banquet. That and a little guy named Winston Churchill who loved his cigars. And as we were waiting to go into the Imperial War Museum, they had displayed outside pictures of the evacuees. Now, if you've read the Chronicles of Narnia or seen the movie, you know that the children are in the country for a reason. Hitler, in 1940, when he found out Britain wasn't going to just roll over, decided he would break the back of the British people by killing their children. He intentionally set out to kill children in central London by bombing population centers. And then you've seen the pictures of these children in your history books, perhaps. Black and white photos, they're holding little numbers, they're holding hands, or they're holding onto a rope. They're standing on the platforms at Charing Cross and at Waterloo, King's Cross and Euston and other stations. Many of them will leave in 1940 and never see their parents again. And I'm explaining this to Michael. And as I'm explaining it to him, I feel a tap on my shoulder. And here's this little woman in her late 70s, early 80s. She points at one of the photographs and said, "I was one of those kids." I grabbed Michael by the lapels. I yanked him over and said, "We are going to listen to what this lady's about to tell us." I said, "Tell me your story." She said, "In August of 1940, my parents put me on the train at Waterloo. I never saw them again." "How old were you?" 4. "Go on." She said, 11 nights after they put me on the train, London was subjected to one of the most vicious bombing raids, and both my parents were killed. I said, "What happened to you?" And she got a big smile on her face, and she said, "Oh, I had a good life. The people who took me in," listen to her words, "just stepped up and adopted me." At that point, I'm bawling. And Michael's bawling because I got him by the neck. But note her words. They just stepped up and adopted me. In 1940, men and women, Great Britain was not even assured it would survive. Hitler had all of Europe. Only the British stood against him. We were nowhere to be found in 1940. That British family could have looked at that girl and said, "No way. We don't even know if we're going to have food. Petroleum is rationed. We don't know if our national identity is going to remain intact. We can't do this." No, they saw a girl and they stepped up and did their duty. And tonight, I want to talk about what it means to step up and leave that legacy of life where God has placed you. And what it's going to involve is you knowing how to make a case for the pro-life view. The world we're in today, men and women, thinks of moral claims like they do ice cream. You like chocolate, I like vanilla, let's not judge each other. But the abortion issue is not about preferences. It's about right and wrong regardless of preferences. To illustrate the problem we face, I want to take you to the park in Northridge, California, where I again was with Michael, only this time he wasn't 15, he was 5. And it was just before we moved from Los Angeles to Atlanta. I had him on the swing in Northridge Park in the San Fernando Valley. And at that time in his life, if you kept the swing going, he was a happy camper. And as I'm pushing him on that swing, a well-dressed lady puts her daughter in the swing next to Michael, and she asked the question I dread getting when I'm not on the road speaking. She said, "What do you do for a living that you can come to the park in the middle of the day when most dads got to be at the office working?" You see, when I'm not on the road speaking, I don't want to fight with you. I want to take my wife to lunch. I want to work on my 66 Mustang. I don't want to fight with you. So I gave her a cop-out answer. "Well, I do lectures in bioethics." Nobody ever asks what that is. I am not like some of you that every time you get on the plane, you think it's your duty to lead the entire 757 to Christ before you get to LaGuardia. I find it convenient to be a staunch Calvinist. God can save whoever he wants while I take a nap. Thank you very much. Did you note the Presbyterians ever so timidly beginning to clap? And a bunch of Baptists gave me the stare. And the Catholics, I didn't have the guts to look at you. But anyway, by the way, Little side note, though we do have theological distinctives, we can work together to save unborn human lives, and we can work together to help women and children. She said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I do lectures in bioethics." She said, "Do you talk about abortion?" Well, now that you mention it, yes. And she said something I'll bet you've heard. "I don't like abortion." Key word in that sentence, like. I don't like it. I think it's bad. But I don't want to impose my views on others. You've heard this before, have you not? Like every day? So I very gently asked her a question. And by the way, men and women, we are ambassadors for Christ. That means we need to be gentle. At the same time, we're being persuasive. I asked her a question. I said, "Do you mind if I ask, why are you personally opposed to abortion?" Because that's what she was telling me. She personally opposed it, but wanted it to be legal. I said, "Why are you personally opposed to it?" She didn't hesitate. She says, "Well, it kills a baby." Very gently, I said, "Can I repeat what you just told me? You personally oppose abortion because you say it kills a baby, but you want it to be legal to kill babies?" And there was stunned silence as she pushed her daughter on the swing for several seconds, and to her credit, she turned to me and said, "Yeah, I did just say that, didn't I? And it doesn't sound very good when you take the spin off it." She had bought the idea, men and women, that moral truth with a capital T is no more true than your favorite flavor of ice cream. That is the world we are in right now. And that is the world we as Christians must be equipped to engage, or our legacy is going to be ruinous. Now, what does this have to do with a ministry like the Miami Women's Center? I'll tell you why it relates to it. What does it have to do with it? This. Every day, what's going on with Tiffany and the staff and the clients they engage is nothing short of spiritual warfare. Now, let me define what I mean by that, because spiritual warfare, a lot of people think it means something that is a little different than the way I'm going to look at it here. In 2 Corinthians 10, the Apostle Paul talks about taking ideas captive that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God, and that believers have a role in doing that. And that is the essence of spiritual warfare. Not that it can't be prayer, not that it can't be other things, but that is certainly a necessary component of it. So how does this relate to the Miami Valley Women's Center? I'll tell you how it relates. At the end of the day, whether that woman aborts or saves her child will come down to a worldview decision. If she believes that she alone determines moral truth, and there's no objective standard she's to get in line with, her child's in grave danger. But if she believes at the end of the day that there is moral truth that's incumbent on her, and it's her job to get in line with it, even if it cost her personally, her child's going to live. This is an idea battle going on in the culture. Every day, the center is open, and I know it's real easy to think, okay, you know what's going on down there at the Miami Valley Women's Center? They're doing a great job giving out stuff. They're a great social organization, and yes, they are. But it's way more than that. It's a confrontation with the culture on the idea that moral truth is real and knowable. And you know what, men and women? You face that same struggle where you live and work and go to school. And tonight, what I want to do is talk about how you can leave a legacy for the pro-life view. And I have some very good news for you. You do not need a PhD in philosophy to do this. You do not need a master's degree. You do not need a bachelor's degree. You don't even need a high school degree. You do need clarity on 3 key questions. And if you have clarity on these 3 key questions, men and women, God will use you to leave a legacy for life where He's placed you. You can give people something to think about. And here's the second thing that's good news. It's not on you to close the deal. We have this idea as Christians that we're to be soul winners. We're to go out there and get people to fall on their knees, say the sinner's prayer. I have news for you. You have never won anyone to Christ, and you never will. Because it's God who saves his people through us proclaiming truth. Your job, there go the Presbyterians. You know what your job is? Your job is to do what my colleague Greg Kokel says, put a pebble in their shoe. Ever had a pebble in your shoe when you're out walking? It's going to wear on you and wear on you until you deal with it. And if you're clear on these 3 questions tonight, you'll put a lot of pebbles in a lot of shoes. Here they are. The first question we need to be clear on is the question, what is the unborn? And I'll explain why that's so critical. Number 2, you need to be clear on the question, what makes us valuable as human beings? And number 3, you need clarity on the question of what's our duty. That first question, what is the unborn, is absolutely essential for one reason. Our culture doesn't want to deal with it. In fact, C.S. Lewis once said the most dangerous culture ideas are those that are simply assumed, not those that are spelled out. Richard Dawkins, the militant atheist, is not Christianity's biggest problem. According to Lewis, the biggest problem are ideas assumed to be true that are never argued for. They're just accepted. How many of you read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn when you were in grade school? Can I see your hands? Most of you. You may remember an exchange that took place in chapter 32 that was absolutely staggering. Huck Finn has been out traveling, and he's coming to see Aunt Sally, who actually thinks he's Tom Sawyer. She's a little confused. Huck shows up with a friend, and Aunt Sally wants to know, well, where have you been? What took you so long to get here? And Huck tells a story. He says, well, ma'am, we were on a steamboat, and it blew a cylinder head. Aunt Sally said, my gosh, was anybody hurt? No, ma'am. It killed a Negro, but nobody was hurt. Well, that's good, said Aunt Sally, because sometimes people do get hurt. What was just assumed about the black man? That he wasn't one of us. And you know what? People do this with abortion all the time. 2 years ago, on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decision that gave us abortion on demand, the President of the United States said the following: today is a day all Americans should celebrate because, listen to the President's rhetoric, this is a nation where everyone deserves the right to pursue their own dreams. Mr. President, with all due respect to your office, does, quote, everyone, unquote, include the unborn? You see how he just assumed the unborn weren't human? He didn't argue for it. He simply assumed it. No attempt to argue for it. This is what we're up against, men and women. An assumption the unborn are not one of us, but not an assumption that anybody wants to spell out and argue for. They're content to just let it lie there. Would anyone you know in a million years argue you should be able to kill toddlers in the name of choice and who decides? No. Why do they argue that way with abortion? Because they assume the unborn aren't human. Now, you're going to hear people say to you, well, I talk to people all the time who say they agree with us that the unborn are human and they'll kill them anyway. Don't believe them. They're lying. They don't believe that. How do I know they don't believe it? They will not kill their toddlers for the reasons they give us for killing their fetuses. They don't believe with us that the unborn are human. They haven't settled that question. In their behavior and in their thought processes, they are still assuming the unborn are not one of us. Would anybody you know argue that we should trust women to make their own personal decisions if the question were killing 5-year-olds? Never. They only argue that way because they assume the unborn are not human. They haven't argued for it, they simply assume it. Well, I've raised the question, I'll answer it. What is the unborn? I'm not going to go to the Bible to answer it. It's the wrong place to go. And you shouldn't go there either. The question, what is the unborn, is not a theological question. Our opponents want to make it an issue of private religion. It's not. It's a straightforward empirical question. And the only place to go for it is the science of embryology. And here's what that science says. I'll give it to you in a sentence. From the earliest stages of development, from the very beginning, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You didn't come from an embryo, you once were an embryo. That's the science of embryology. Sure, you were immature, you had yet to grow, but the kind of thing you were was no longer in doubt. There is a decisive break between sperm and egg on one hand and the new developing human being on the other. Sperm and egg are parts of larger human beings. You, as an embryo, were already a whole living human being from the one-cell stage. Now, having said that, I get that there are people who think, I just can't connect with that early embryo. I look at an image of it under a microscope. You can't even see the thing with the naked eye. And when you look at it under the microscope, it looks like just a tiny ball of 10 cells. I know in my head that maybe that's a human, but how do I convince someone out there? Let me give you an illustration that might help clarify things a little bit here. For those of you under the age of 45, you had no idea how dark it was in the pre-digital image age. You have no idea how bad and how tension-building film development could be. So for those of you that are not quite old enough, you've not hit that 45 threshold, allow me to take you back to the dark ages of photography. The way it used to work was, you had this thing called a camera that wasn't a smartphone. It was actually quite big. And you would shoot your pictures, but it wouldn't get digitally recorded as a file. It got recorded analog style on film. And you had to shoot all 36 exposures before you pulled the film out of the camera, because if you pulled it out too soon, you'd expose the whole roll and lose all your pictures. And after you had shot all of your images, which might take up to a year, depending on how long, how many pictures you were taking. You see, we didn't have Facebook back then. We didn't have to shoot a picture and 6 seconds later be showing it to the world. You'd shoot your pictures, and then came the fun part. You'd take the film out of the camera, put it in this little canister, and you'd drive to the far corner of the supermarket parking lot where there was a little shack called Photomat. You would drop the film off. You would then wait a month and a half for your pictures to come back, half of them overexposed. Do I speak truth? However, in the late 60s, Kodak came up with something that sort of changed the equation. They came up with this thing called a Polaroid camera. Now, Polaroids have made a comeback, but for those of you that are younger, the early Polaroid cameras were monstrosities to look at. They looked like something Satan invented. They were not pretty, but they had an advantage. You didn't have to wait 30 days or 60 days for your pictures. You would shoot the picture, it would spit out a white piece of paper, you'd wait about 2 minutes as you shook the thing, and then people all over the room doing this. Boy, you've got the motor memory just all came rushing back. And eventually, after about 2-3 minutes, your picture would emerge. You didn't have to go to Photomat. Now, let's pretend, to borrow an example from Richard Stith, that it's 1970, pre-digital days. You have a Polaroid camera. You are on a Mexican safari. And you, at the head of our column, just happened to shoot a picture of a black jaguar leaping across the trail in front of us. Black jaguars are almost never photographed. National Geographic will pay you big bucks. You got the pic. And while you're waiting for that picture to emerge, I come up behind you and I rip the camera out of your hands. I yank the paper out of it, and I tear up the photograph. Are you angry at me? Yeah, you're going to kill me even if you're pro-life, right? I mean, you're mad. What if I said to you, what's the big deal? There's no picture there. That's just a brown smudge on a white piece of paper. There's no jaguar there. You would look at me with eyes raging and you would say, are you kidding? The jaguar in the picture was already there. We just couldn't see him yet because he hadn't developed. In the same way, men and women, you were already there from the very beginning. We just couldn't see you because you hadn't developed. That's the science of embryology. But science cannot tell me how to treat anything. And thus we need to ask the next question. We need to ask not only what is the unborn, we've got to ask what makes humans valuable in the first place. Now, as Christians, we have an answer. We say, well, we bear the image of God. The Bible says in both the Old and New Testaments that all humans bear the image of God. Genesis teaches that in chapter 1. James chapter 3 teaches that. It's clear from Scripture we have value because we bear the image of our Maker, and you're absolutely correct. But I think we may want to go about this a little differently with people who don't accept the biblical narrative. How do we convince them that if they really care about human equality, they shouldn't be discriminating against the unborn? What I want you to do right now tonight is I want you to take a minute and just look around the room and stare at about 5 or 6 people. Single gentlemen, if there's a young lady here who caught your eye, this is your God-sanctified moment to make contact. Don't laugh, I met my wife that way. All right? 1, 2, 3, go. Stare. Just stare at a few people. Don't stare at me. Make somebody uncomfortable. All right. What makes us equal? Are we all equally self-aware tonight? No, we are not. Some people say that embryo has no right to life because it's not self-aware. Well, if self-awareness is decisive and you have less of it than I do, I have a greater right to life than you do. Are we all equally athletic? At age 56, I can still beat most of you in this room at horse. I can drain three-pointers. But in a real basketball game, I don't get to drain three-pointers. You know why? I'm too slow to get open. I don't even get my hands on the ball anymore. If athletic ability, physical ability makes us valuable, and we don't share that equally, human equality is a myth. Are we all equally intelligent? We're not. But if intelligence is what gives us value and we don't share that equally, we don't have human equality. You know what's great, men and women? The pro-life worldview can answer the question, what makes us equal? And here's the answer. We are all equal in our fundamental dignity because we all have the same human nature. And that nature bears the image of our Maker. Dogs produce dogs, cats produce cats, humans produce humans. That's the law of biogenesis. What's a human nature? It's the thing that makes you human and not a dog, not a cat, not a bird. And you either have a human nature or you don't. It doesn't come in degrees. You know when you got your human nature? When you came to be. When did you come to be? The science of embryology tells us at the moment of fertilization. Now, of course, you're going to get people who say, well, okay, fine. I'll admit that I have value and a right to life. I'll admit you do too. But an embryo, that embryo differs from us. He's not like us. And you know what? That's true. The embryo does differ from us. But does the embryo differ from us in ways that justify killing him? It's one thing to note differences. It's quite another to explain why that's a death sentence. Stephen Schwartz says there's 4 differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult. Size, level of development, environment, meaning where you're located, and degree of dependency. You can use the acronym SLED as a reminder of these differences. And not one of them is a good reason for saying you could be killed then but not now. Let's look at that for a minute. Size, there's your S. You were smaller as an embryo than you are tonight. But since when, as a matter of principle, does body size determine value? Men are generally larger than women. Do they have more fundamental dignity and rights than women? Simply because on balance they tend to be larger? Shaquille O'Neal, the 7'2" basketball star, who spent his glorious career in most part with my beloved Los Angeles Lakers before committing treason and ending his career with the Celtics, is a foot taller than everyone in this room. Does it follow he has a greater right to life simply because he's bigger? When feminist Katha Pollitt says, how can you call an embryo with a pea-sized brain the size of a dot at the end of the sentence a human being, she has not argued why body size gives value. She's just asserting it. Body size doesn't give value. What about L, level of development? You were less developed as an embryo than you are today. I agree. But since when does your level of development determine whether you live or die? 2-year-old girls do not have a developed reproductive system yet. Are they less human and valuable than the 21-year-old young woman who does? I spoke to a group of high school students today at Dayton Christian School and at Legacy School. And by the way, the Pregnancy Center set both of those events up for me. And when you stop to think about this for a moment, what I want you to understand is that when the Miami Valley Women's Center sent me in there, we were doing proactive work. We're not only waiting for clients to come to us, we're playing offense. We're getting to these students before they even consider abortion. That's saving a lot of lives right there. Hats off to you guys for doing that for me, Tiffany. But I spoke to these students today. I'm guessing we had a combined total of about 600, maybe 650. And I said to those students, you are less developed than your parents. You are less developed than your parents physically, and you are less developed than your parents intellectually, which came as a complete shock to most of them. But you don't reach your intellectual peak till your mid-40s. Does it follow your parents have a greater right to life than you? This is precisely the point Abraham Lincoln made when he would debate proponents of slavery. Proponents of slavery would say, that black man isn't like us. He's different. Lincoln said, you're right, he is different. But is he different in ways that justify enslaving him? And here's how Lincoln answered his critics. I'm going to quote him almost word for word here. Lincoln looked at his critics, whether it was Stephen Douglas or anyone else, and he said the following. You say man A is white, man B is dark. Oh, it is skin color then? The fair-skinned man having the right to enslave the dark-skinned man? Take care, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. You say it is not skin color, it's a matter of intellect. The white man you allege has superior intellect to the dark man. Take care again, by that rule, you are a slave to the first person you meet with an intellect superior to yours. You say it is not skin color, it's a matter of intellect. It's not a matter of intellect, rather, it's a matter of interest. The white man having it in his interest to enslave the dark man, take care yet again. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you can meet who can make it his interest to enslave you. Lincoln was showing that by the force of principled reasoning, the same arguments used to discredit the slave work equally well for the white man. And by the same token, the arguments people put forward to justify killing the unborn work equally well to diminish us all. Peter Singer, you may be aware of him. He's the Princeton ethicist who argues in his book, Practical Ethics, that no newborn should be considered a person until 30 days after birth, and disabled infants can be killed on the spot by the attending physician. We're horrified by that. However, he at least is consistent. Peter Singer doesn't like Planned Parenthood. He thinks they're intellectually vacuous. Here's what Singer says. Fetus is not self-aware. Newborn isn't self-aware. You can kill both. At least he's consistent. Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. Yes, you depended on your mother for survival. And in just a moment, I'll tell you why that won't work. But even before I talk about that, we got to deal with the E, environment, where you're located. Size, level of development, environment. You were in the womb, now you're out. But how does where you are change what you are? If you drove at least an hour to get here tonight, can I see your hands? A couple of you, good. You traveled, let's assume, 70 miles to get here. If you didn't stop being you because you traveled 70 miles, how does a journey of 7 inches down the birth canal suddenly transform you from non-human, non-valuable thing we can kill to valuable human being that we can't? Answer, if you weren't already human and valuable, you're not getting there by changing your address. And finally, degree of dependency. You depended on your mother for survival, but since when does dependency on another human being mean that we can kill you? Since when does owning property mean you can hurt those who happen to reside there? This is crazy thinking, but our culture has bought it. Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, only 4 differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, and not one of those is a good reason for saying you could be killed then, but not now. Now, I know what some of you were thinking as you were listening to me go over that SLED acronym. I could read your mind. You were going, you know, if that speaker were sensitive, and if he really cared about his audience, he would have brought a SLED card with him that just summarized that whole thing he just did so we didn't have to take notes faster than broke people at a Dave Ramsey seminar. But knowing you would think this, I went ahead and brought a SLED card with me tonight. And I want you to know it will be for sale tonight for $39,000 with your gift to the Miami Valley Women's Center. And we will sell this card to you and I will sign it. Actually, we will have them on my book table when the evening ends, and I will give you one per family if you tear off the contact part here so that we can mail you our quarterly pro-life training materials and you can take the SLED part home with you absolutely free. I end tonight with this question. What's our duty? One sentence describes our duty. We are to love our unborn neighbor and his mother. Is the unborn my neighbor? He is if he's a human being. And we've made the case tonight that he's just that. How do we love our unborn neighbor? By making a case for life. Now, I'm going to tell you right now what you're going to say at your Thanksgiving table in a few weeks when Aunt Betty from Boston shows up, who's not a Christian, who doesn't share your pro-life views, and in between bites of turkey and stuffing, she looks at you and says, now tell me again why you're pro-life. You're not going to cite Psalm 139. Here's what you're going to say. And somebody time me. We're going to get this done in under a minute. All right? Can you time me, sir? Dr. Patrick, can I have you do that for me? Dr. Oliver? Okay, here goes. He's pulling out technology, man. He's not looking at the watch. He pulls out the iPhone. This is serious stuff. When I say go, get ready. 1, 2, 3, go. Aunt Betty, I am pro-life because the science of embryology says that from the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You weren't part of another human being like these skin cells on the back of my hand. You were already a member of the human family, even though you had yet to grow and mature. And you know what else, Aunt Betty? There's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, that would justify killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying you have a right to life today, but you didn't have it then. Did I get it done in a minute? Where did I come in at? Well, I was less than a minute. Okay, I'm going to take your word for it. I accept that on faith. I do. Now, what did you notice about what I just said? Did I cite Bible verses? Did I communicate biblical truth? Yes. You have to know how to do this, men and women, and this SLED card will give you a summary of what I just said. Second thing we need to do, we need to love the unborn's mother. 40% of all abortions annually are repeat abortions. Why? Because the first abortion was never resolved. There's only one resolution to the sin and guilt of abortion, and that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we can proclaim that gospel clearly and unequivocally, even as we proclaim clear and unequivocally the truth of abortion. Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Not because pro-lifers say so. By the way, feminists say so. Camille Paglia calls abortion murder, the dismemberment of one human subject by another. Feminist Naomi Wolf calls abortion a real death, not something we should gloss over. We need to proclaim that truth. Today at the schools we were at, we not only proclaimed it, we showed the students a short video depicting abortion. I show it at debates all over the country. Why? Not to beat people up emotionally, but because images convey truth better than words ever could. When we're dealing with post-abortion men and women, we don't spare them guilt when we don't talk about abortion. We spare them healing because unconfessed sin has them out of full fellowship with Christ. And the kindest thing we can do is remind them of the gospel. Men and women, the gospel puts every one of us in this room tonight on equal footing before God's justice. The gospel says that God creates a good world, a holy God creates a good world. We rebel against him, and God, who has every right to destroy the race for his rebellion, or for its rebellion, does something remarkable. He sends Jesus to bear in full the judgment we deserve. By the way, think of this for a moment. If God saved no one, would he still be a just God? Yes, because we'd be getting exactly what we deserve. There was a guy I used to lead Bible studies with in college, my friend Jim. He's now an atheist. And he called me up a while back, messaged me and said, "How can you believe in God when there's so much evil in the world? If God really existed, he'd get rid of it." I said, "Jim, if God got rid of all evil at midnight tonight, where would you be at 12:01? You see, we always want God to get rid of other people's evil, never our own. And C.S. Lewis put it well, when God does deal with evil, he's going to make a complete mop-up of it. But God in his mercy tarries. And the gospel is the story of a good God who sends Jesus to bear in full the judgment we deserve so that those who believe in him are forgiven. And not only that, men and women, if your faith is in Jesus tonight, God the Father is no longer your judge. He's your dad, and he adopts you into his family as a dearly loved child. Not because of what you've done, but because of what his son did. That is incredibly good news that we must proclaim. We also must step up and do our duty. How many of you saw the movie Schindler's List? You may remember a scene at the end of that movie where Oskar Schindler, who had taken his own money to buy people off the death camp list, he'd go to the Nazi commanders and say, "Don't kill these Jews, I'll buy them." He goes to the death camp commanders, gives them money, takes the Jews back to his factory, puts them to work, and this scene, as the movie is drawing toward a close, depicts him saying goodbye, now that the war is over, to all the people he had saved. And they're all gathered outside, and he's getting ready to get in his car. And in one of the most impacting scenes in all of cinema, he looks at the Jewish leader, and the Jewish leader takes his hand to thank him, and Oskar looks at him and says, "I could have got more out. I didn't do enough." And the leader of the Jewish people says, "Oskar, there's 1,100 of us alive today because of what you did." Oskar says, "I could have got more out." And he looks at his car. He says, "My car. Why did I keep my car? They would have given me 10 more people, 10 more for this car. Why did I keep it?" He rips a pen off his jacket and says, "This pen, 2 more, 1 for sure. I could have got more out and I didn't do it. Why did I keep this? And the scene climaxes as he collapses behind his automobile, weeping profusely, saying, I didn't do enough. I could have got more out. And this from a man who used his own resources to buy people off the death camp list. Are we taking our Holocaust in 2016 as seriously as that man took his in the 1940s? Are we willing to step up and love our unborn neighbor at a truly sacrificial level that says, men and women, we're not merely opposed to abortion at the feeling level, we're opposed to it at the behavioral level. When Jesus talked about loving our neighbor, he told us exactly what he meant. The man's going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Thieves beat him up, leave him for dead in Luke chapter 10. 2 religious leaders walked by who would have felt pity, but they didn't take pity. And Jesus said that wasn't good enough. Only the Good Samaritan went out of his way to help his fellow traveler. And Jesus said that's love. I know tonight we look at our nation and we see what's going on culturally, and it's really easy to want to just give up. D.C. is a mess. The culture's a mess. State houses are a mess. It's real easy to think, why bother? Well, surrender's not an option, first of all. Secondly, you have the opportunity tonight to love your unborn neighbor right here in your community through the ministry of Miami Valley Women's Center.